Hi everybody, welcome back. Glad you could tune in again. Okay, so we've got another question arising from some of the previous devotions on the subject of the Sabbath and the Lord's Day. This is a question that might seem at first glance not to be particularly important, but actually turns out to have some potentially quite significant implications for how we actually observe the Lord's Day. It's also not an easy one to answer. It's one that some folks I've come across in the past have had quite strong opinions about, which surprises me given the complexity of some of the biblical data. And so actually it gives us an opportunity to think about, again, how we work through questions that are complicated and where it might not be obvious how exactly we ought to proceed. The question is, when does the day begin? Now, perhaps you're thinking that really is too obvious to need discussing. Everybody knows when the day begins. We mark the transition from Monday to Tuesday, Tuesday to Wednesday, Thursday to Friday, and so on and so forth, at midnight. That's when Friday ends and Saturday begins. That's when Saturday ends and Sunday begins. And at midnight, at the end of Sunday, that's when the Lord's Day is over. All sounds fairly straightforward, doesn't it? But not so fast. There is some evidence in Scripture that the day was thought of as beginning and ending at other times. A good deal of evidence points in the direction of the idea that the day began and ended at sundown or in the evening at some point, let's say notionally 6 p.m. or so. And there's some suggestion in some other texts that at least in some contexts the day was thought of as beginning and ending at dawn. Now, clearly this would have some implications, wouldn't it? Let's imagine for a second that you thought that the day began and ended at evening, or 6 p.m. or sundown or something like that. That might mean that you organised your Lord's Day a little bit differently. You might begin with a family meal on Saturday night as your kind of Lord's Day meal together, Saturday evening after sundown. And then what you might do Sunday evening, 6 p.m. or sundown or whatever, the Lord's Day is over. On Sunday evening, you might then think, well, I can go and do my homework now, can't I? Or I can go and do some preparation for work Monday through Friday without breaking the letter or the spirit of the Sabbath teaching or the Lord's Day teaching because the Lord's Day is over. So you can see it's got some potential for some practical implications. It's worth our while just thinking it through. So where do we go with this? Well, the answer is there are a large number of texts that ought to be taken into consideration. And if you want the lowdown, there's an article, quite a significant article by Dr. J. Amanda McGuire. Back in 2008, she wrote an article in the Andrews University Seminary Studies Journal called Evening or Morning, When Does the Biblical Day Begin? That'll give you chapter and verse and the full lowdown and a whole bunch of other references to chase up if you really want to. And there's a couple of dozen or more passages to take into consideration. I'm going to restrict the discussion to 3 or 4, which I think are most appropriate for us to focus on and which at least serve to open up the issues. And the one text that seems to have caught the attention of most Reformed evangelical folks of my acquaintance is Leviticus 23, verse 32. This is discussing the great Day of Atonement. And here's what it says. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest. The Day of Atonement is a special Sabbath, in effect. And you shall afflict yourselves. On the 9th day of the month, beginning at evening, from evening to evening, shall you keep your Sabbath. Now, just hold on one little second. Everybody knows that the Day of Atonement is on the 10th day of the month. That's what it says in verse 27 of that same chapter. So what's this doing talking about the 9th day of the month? Well, the verse makes it clear, doesn't it? The observance of the Day of Atonement was to be from evening of the previous day. From evening to the evening of the 10th day. That was to be your Day of Atonement. And so many people have got a hold of this and they've come to the conclusion, very understandably and perhaps rightly, that the way that Sabbaths operated in Israel was that they were conceived of as beginning at sundown the previous day, Friday, and ending at sundown on Saturday. And that would mean then, if you're trying to take that into account in the way that we observe the Lord's Day, you'd begin your Lord's Day observance on Saturday evening, 6 p.m. or so at sundown, and you'd end it early evening on Sunday. At the same time, this does evince some suggestion that the Hebrews, even in writing this, were conscious of that previous day being the previous day. It's called the 9th day. And so even there does seem to be some fluidity in how the day was reckoned as beginning and ending. But nonetheless, you can easily see why you'd pick the evening as a convenient marker, because in the absence of high-tech clocks and timepieces that can keep time accurately, sundown is just a convenient marker. It's also when you would probably stop work anyway. In the real world of ancient Israel, 1500 BC or 1000 BC, you're going to have to stop work when the sun goes down, because artificial light is so expensive, and therefore that would be the natural point to begin your Sabbath rest, celebration, or affliction in the case of the Day of Atonement. So maybe the Sabbath and the Lord's Day do begin in the evening. Other texts that point in a similar direction would include Luke 23:54. This is the record of Joseph of Arimathea taking the body of Jesus. It says, verse 54, "It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning." Now that's intriguing, because it seems that Joseph took the body pretty soon after Jesus' death, and that took place sometime around or shortly after the 3 o'clock in the afternoon, if you're following the timings in the Synoptics and in John's Gospel. And then it says, and he's preparing the body and so on and so forth, and the Sabbath was beginning. Is it really plausible that he worked all the way through the night until the morning, just about, preparing the body? Is it not more plausible that this Sabbath beginning marks the approach of the evening? That would seem to make a lot more sense of the context. Even more compelling is John chapter 20 verse 1, which records the visit of Mary Magdalene to the tomb. "On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb." Now hold on just a second. It's still dark before dawn, and yet this is early on this day, and it's the first day of the week. So clearly it's not possible to imagine that the transition from one day to another takes place at dawn, if Mary came on that day early before dawn. So John 20 verse 1 does seem to point to the idea that the day transition takes place in the evening. However, you know that in the Synoptic Gospels, the day is counted beginning at the morning, roughly 6 a.m., because of the timings that are noted for the crucifixion of Jesus. The 6th hour to the 9th hour is widely reckoned by commentators all over the spectrum to refer to something like midday till 3 p.m., 3 in the afternoon. So if the 6th hour is midday, the first hour is, 6 a.m., or notionally, in the absence of accurate clocks, sometime around dawn. So there maybe you've got some suggestion either that some people did think of the day as beginning at dawn, or there's a sense in which there's day for 12 hours and then night for 12 hours. So day can mean both the whole 24-hour period, of which there are 7, or the 12-hour period that alternates with periods of night. At the very least, it's not obvious, at least to me, how we should read those texts. And if you read the article by Amanda Maguire, you'll discover a whole pile of other texts which seem to suggest other possibilities. And it all leaves me feeling, well, what do we do with this? How do we deal with what looks like the kind of uncertainty that makes it hard to be dogmatic about where exactly the biblical day begins and ends? The best suggestion I think I can make is, if it seems hard to be dogmatic about it, then let's not be dogmatic about it. It would be a shame, wouldn't it, to be extremely forceful and dogmatic about something which at the very least seems hard to pin down exactly. On the other hand, at the same time, it would seem fairly in keeping, at least with the pattern of Leviticus and the Sabbath regulations, the Day of Atonement, to consider the possibility that the Lord's Day ought to be marked from the evening of the previous day, the evening of Saturday. I'm not sure that I can give a definitive answer, at least not with the awareness I currently have of those texts. And having read Amanda Maguire's lengthy article, I'm still not much the wiser about where I'd land if you put me up against a wall, held a gun to my head and demanded a yes or a no answer. I think it's one of those things where we can all see what the spirit of Scripture's teaching is, and we can imagine different ways of reflecting that spirit in our everyday lives. And perhaps that's the best place to conclude, that the way to respect the teaching of Scripture, at least at this point, is to honour what seems to be its intent, that we set that time aside to rest and do so conscientiously and consistently and wisely, rather than dividing into camps on the basis of something which biblically seems fairly hard to tie down. Thanks again for that question, and I hope that attempt at an answer has at least been moderately helpful. The Lord bless you, and I hope very much to see you soon. Bye for now.